In this final unit on the book of Joshua, we'll ask, what's the point of this book? In the previous units, we went step by step through the book of Joshua, and we wrestled with the question of violence, and also asked, what kind of literature is this? This final unit deals with the question, what's the point? What is the main message or idea of this book? Somewhat surprisingly, Lawson Younger, in the study that I talked about in the previous unit, does not point out what to me seems a significant difference between Joshua and other conquest accounts. The aim of the Assyrian conquest account, for instance, is intimidation, to instill fear and trembling. The Hittite accounts complain about betrayal and unfaithfulness, and essentially call for vengeance and punishment. The Egyptian accounts glorify Pharaoh at times beyond human likeness. So, what is the point of the Hebrew account, and how is it different? The Israelite account celebrates God's faithfulness in keeping and fulfilling his promise. It does not establish a king, but a nation. It also builds faith as it sets the standard for what God's people, all of them, not merely the king, can do if they are obedient. And above all, it celebrates God's faithfulness. Different from other accounts, Joshua is not in the I form. The narrative does not elevate Joshua, nor does he boast in the way the kings in those other conquest accounts do. That this is the main idea of Joshua is confirmed when we look at the summary statements in chapter 11, 21, and 23. They're worth reading in full, so that's what we'll do next. From chapter 11, so Joshua took all that land, the hill country and all the Negeb and all the land of Goshen and the lowland and the Arabah and the hill country of Israel and its lowland, from Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir, as far as Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. And he captured all their kings and struck them and put them to death. Well, this sounds like Joshua did it all, but just a few verses later, verse 23 in chapter 11, we read this. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. But now notice how this is explained differently in chapter 21. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. But one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. And then, in Joshua's own words, toward the end of his life, and now I am about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you, not one of them has failed. God has kept his promise. That's the point. There is a second point to the book related to the first. To fully get this, we need to look at what the Israelites were getting themselves into. They moved from a desert climate in Egypt to a Mediterranean climate in the Promised Land. Mediterranean climate means the rain falls mostly in the winter half of the year, and the amount varies considerably from year to year. The summer half of the year is dry. There may not be any rain for months. As a result, everything turns brown. This is why the agricultural year begins in the fall, when the rain starts again, and the harvest is in spring. Think Feast of First Fruits, right after Passover, and Pentecost, both harvest feasts. We think about this cycle in scientific terms. We talk about weather, meteorology and climate and give a scientific explanation for the cycle. Not so the Israelites and the Canaanites. To them, all of this was the doing of God or of gods. Whether there would be enough rain depended on them. The gods might be angry and might be necessary to appease or placate the gods. The Canaanites, presumably, knew how to do this, and besides, they had an assortment of appropriate gods to help them. And we need to realize that in their eyes, the world worked with a very different logic. So what gods did the Canaanites have in place to help them manage the seasons and the fertility of the land? At the top of the Canaanite pantheon stood El, and the principal female deity at his side was Asherah, who had given birth to 70 sons. One of these was Baal, the storm god, and therefore responsible for rain, which obviously made him very important in this climate. Baal was typically portrayed with a lightning flash in his hand, as we can see here, and he characteristically wears an oddly shaped helmet. Many small statues of Baal have been found all over Canaan, including in Israelite locations. The lightning, by the way, is not visible in the statuette, but it is implied. Baal is often described as the rider on the clouds, which of course matches his status as the storm god who comes with clouds and rain. Interestingly, the Old Testament is ferociously opposed to Baal worship, but does not hesitate to use appellations like this, rider on the clouds, to describe Yahweh. Whatever is claimed for Baal by the Canaanites truly belongs to Yahweh. El, the father of Baal, was very old and not very involved in the running of things. It was really Baal who led the gods and effectively ruled the world. What happened to Baal, god of storm and rain, in the summer? In some rather mysterious way, this links with a myth the Canaanites believed that at one point the god of the underworld or death, his name is Mod, had managed to kill Baal, which stopped the rain. In the myth, Baal had to be released from the realm of the dead for rain and fertility to return to the earth. And somehow the yearly rhythm reflected this. This myth plays an important role in the worship of Baal, which was all about fertility. There's some debate about the extent to which ritual prostitution played a role in this as well. The Old Testament seems to imply that it did, perhaps as a magical act or symbolic enactment, although that's a bit of a guess. There's no hard evidence for this, no real explanation given. Another question regarding the Baal cult is whether child sacrifice was involved. As with ritual prostitution, it is nowadays sometimes denied that the Canaanites practiced child sacrifice. However, here too, the Old Testament seems to imply that they did and that the Israelites followed them. There's no need to warn against a practice that no one is engaged in. The Phoenicians, basically Canaanites from Lebanon, seem to have practiced child sacrifice in later centuries, although this too is debated. However, a number of ancient sources refer to this. Besides, many burial urns have been found with the burnt remains of children in late Phoenician cemeteries. Fact is, many statuettes of naked female goddesses, presumably, have been found in Canaan and beyond. This illustration is actually from Iran, but similar objects have been found in many places all over the ancient Near East. They may represent either Asherah or Astarte, also called Ishtar, the goddess of the moon and of love and fertility. Since we're on the topic, there's more to say about Asherah, El's consort, and the primary female deity. Her name also seems to be used for a cult object that was often placed beside an altar. This object was a pole or perhaps a sacred tree or even a garden. This is the cult object that the Israelites were told to cut down. Instead, they often erected their own. The altar, in such a case, might still be dedicated to Yahweh, for all we know, but if it is, he is now understood in terms of Baal, or he's merged with Baal. He may eventually be replaced by Baal altogether. And he is not alone. There is a location in the northeast of the Sinai desert with the name Kuntilet Airut, not entirely sure how to pronounce it, and there inscriptions and illustrations have been found like the one you see here that clearly illustrate the syncretism that developed. Some of the inscriptions speak of Yahweh of Samaria or Yahweh of Timon and his Asherah. In other words, like El and Baal, Yahweh now also has a wife. And notice the bull and calf symbolism in the illustration, also reminiscent of El and Baal worship in Canaan. Obviously, with Israel moving into the Promised Land, syncretism, the mixing of Yahweh worship with Canaanite beliefs and practices, would be an ever-present danger. Eugene Peterson captures the promiscuous and sexualized Canaanite religion as the Israelites practiced it very well in The Message when he translates the high places of worship as sex and religion shrines. Mixing sex and religion makes for a potent, powerful, and seductive brew. The worship of other gods, idolatry, will be Israel's downfall. But we still face this danger today, even if in a less literal way. What does our culture say we need to succeed? Money, sex, power, and a host of other items that can easily become like gods to us, ruling our lives. There is a difference with idolatry in the Old Testament. Baal and Asherah were wrong all the way. They simply had to go. Nothing there to redeem. With us, when we talk about idols, it's mostly elements of creation that we wrongly absolutize, but that are in themselves legitimate when in their rightful place and function. We cannot remove them altogether unless we go and live in the desert, perhaps, but we cannot live without money or authority in the present world. We do need to dethrone them, make them servants again, and tools, not masters or first priorities. But the threat is comparable. It's still there. Beware of other gods. I started off arguing that the main point or message of Joshua is God has been faithful. He has kept his promise. But saying it like this is incomplete. It provokes the question, so what? I also claimed there is a second part or point to the message of Joshua, something that follows from that first point, God has been faithful, and that links with Canaanite religion and culture. That's why I've been talking about this. In the second unit of this series, looking at the overview of the book of Joshua, we noticed a frame around the land distribution for the 9.5 tribes in chapter 14 to 19. It was linked with Caleb and Joshua, which actually fits well with the idea of God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promise to these two who also were faithful. There is another frame around the entire book, chapter 1 and chapter 23 and 24. And this is what leads us to the second purpose. Chapter 1, we noticed, included a strong exhortation addressed to Joshua with several parts to it. We looked at it in some detail in the first unit. At the end of Joshua, this same exhortation is now spoken to all of Israel. Let's read it. Therefore, be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand nor to the left, that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mention of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. The book of Joshua is a call to commitment. Because God is faithful, Israel should be faithful as well. God has kept and is keeping his part of the deal. Now Israel should keep its part in return. This is the whole point of the covenant renewal ceremony at the end of the book. It's also the point of the memorials spread out throughout the book. There are 7 of them. 12 stones for crossing the Jordan, a burial place for Achan and one for the king of Ai, then an altar and law text on stones at Mount Ebal, Makkedah, another burial place, the altar of witness, and the stone at Shechem. They serve as reminders of God's faithfulness, of the consequences of unfaithfulness, of the importance of the law. They are put in place to support continuity, the passing on of Israel's faith commitment to the next generation, which is not an easy thing to accomplish. But it is a major reason why this book and others were written, and why we are called to study, proclaim, and remember what happened back then.